What matters in life is not what happens to you but what you remember and how you remember it. No medicine cures what happiness cannot. It's enough for me to be sure that you and I exist at this moment. He allowed himself to be swayed by his conviction that human beings are not born once and for all on the day their mothers give birth to them, but that life obliges them over and over again to give birth to themselves. Sex is the consolation you have when you can't have love. It is not true that people stop pursuing dreams because they grow old because they stop pursuing dreams. There is always something left to love. Perhaps this is what the stories meant when they called somebody heartsick. Your heart and your stomach and your whole insides felt empty and hollow and aching. Nobody deserves your tears, but whoever deserves them will not make you cry. He was still too young to know that the heart's memory eliminates the bad and magnifies the good, and that thanks to this artifice we manage to endure the burden of the past. Tell him yes, even if you are dying of fear, even if you are sorry later. Because whatever you do, you will be sorry all the rest of your life if you say no. Nothing in this world was more difficult than love. She would defend herself, saying that love, no matter what else it might be, was a natural talent. She would say, you are either born knowing how, or you never know. But when a woman decides to sleep with a man, there is no wall she will not scale, no fortress she will not destroy. No moral consideration she will not ignore at its very root. There is no God worth worrying about. All human beings have three lives, public, private, and secret. The only regret I will have in dying is if it is not for love. My heart has more rooms in it than a whorehouse. Human beings are not born once and for all on the day their mothers give birth to them, but life obliges them over and over again to give birth to themselves. Wisdom comes to us when it can no longer do any good. Time was not passing, it was turning in a circle. Then he made one last effort to search in his heart for the place where his affection had rotted away, and he could not find it. A true friend is the one who holds your hand and touches your heart. It was inevitable, the scent of bitter almonds always reminded him of the fate of unrequited love. He really had been through death. But he had returned because he could not bear the solitude. The problem with marriage is that it ends every night after making love, and it must be rebuilt every morning before breakfast. A lie is more comfortable than doubt, more useful than love, more lasting than truth. They were so close to each other that they preferred death to separation. Wherever they might be, they always remember that the past was a lie, that memory has no return, that every spring gone by could never be recovered, and that the wildest and most tenacious love was an ephemeral truth in the end. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was to remember the distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. Do not allow me to forget you. And both of them remained floating in an empty universe where the only everyday and eternal reality was love. Don't let yourself die without knowing the wonder of fucking with love. He is ugly and sad. But he is all love. It had to be a mad dream, one that would give her the courage she would need to discard the prejudices of a class that had not always been hers but had become hers more than anyone's. It had to teach her to think of love as a state of grace, not the means to anything but the alpha and omega, an end in itself. What does he say? He asked. He's very sad, Ursula answered, because he thinks that you're going to die. Tell him, the colonel said, smiling, that a person doesn't die when he should but when he can. No matter what, nobody can take away the dances you've already had. Amputees suffer pains, cramps, itches in the leg that is no longer there. That is how she felt without him, feeling his presence where he no longer was. She felt the abyss of disenchantment. Be calm. God awaits you at the door. Fiction was invented the day Jonah arrived home and told his wife that he was 3 days late because he had been swallowed by a whale. With her Florentina Warisa learned what he had already experienced many times without realizing it, that one can be in love with several people at the same time, feel the same sorrow with each, and not betray any of them. Alone in the midst of the crowd on the pier, he said to himself in a flash of anger, my heart has more rooms than a whorehouse. She had never imagined that curiosity was one of the many masks of love. The adolescents of my generation, greedy for life, forgot in body and soul about their hopes for the future until reality taught them that tomorrow was not what they had dreamed, and they discovered nostalgia. Cease, cows, life is short. Age isn't how old you are but how old you feel. Crazy people are not crazy if one accepts their reasoning. Only God knows how much I love you. Never stop smiling, not even when you're sad. Someone might fall in love with your smile. She knew that he loved her above all else, more than anything in the world, but only for his own sake. He was still too young to know that the heart's memory eliminates the bad and magnifies the good, and that thanks to this artifice we manage to endure the burden of the past. But when he stood at the railing of the ship, only then did he understand to what extent he had been an easy recidium to the charitable deceptions of nostalgia. She discovered with great delight that one does not love one's children just because they are one's children but because of the friendship formed while raising them. Lost in the solitude of his immense power, he began to lose direction. Death really did not matter to him but life did, and therefore the sensation he felt when they gave their decision was not a feeling of fear but of nostalgia. But that afternoon he asked himself, with his infinite capacity for illusion, if such pitiless indifference might not be a subterfuge for hiding the torments of love. Always tell what you feel. Do what you think. Things have a life of their own, the gypsy proclaimed with a harsh accent. It's simply a matter of waking up their souls. Intrigued by that enigma, he dug so deeply into her sentiments that in search of interest he found love, because by trying to make her love him he ended up falling in love with her. Together they had overcome the daily incomprehension, the instantaneous hatred, the reciprocal nastiness, and fabulous flashes of glory in the conjugal conspiracy. It was time when they both loved each other best, without hurry or excess, when both were most conscious of and grateful for their incredible victories over adversity. Life would still present them with other moral trials, of course, but that no longer mattered. They were on the other shore. You can't eat hope, the woman said. You can't eat it, but it sustains you, the colonel replied. The secret of a good old age is simply an honorable pact with solitude. It was as if they had leapt over the arduous cavalry of conjugal life and gone straight to the heart of love. They were together in silence. 1 minute of reconciliation is worth more than a whole life of friendship. Very well, I will marry you if you promise not to make me eat eggplant. There is no greater glory than to die for love. Freedom is often the first casualty of war. Thus they went on living in a reality that was slipping away, momentarily captured by words, but which would escape irremediably when they forgot the values of the written letters. And the two of them loved each other for a long time in silence without making love again. He recognized her despite the uproar, through his tears of unrepeatable sorrow at dying without her, and he looked at her for the last and final time with eyes more luminous, more grief-stricken, more grateful than she had ever seen them in half a century of a shared life, and he managed to say to her with his last breath, "Only God knows how much I loved you. Take advantage of it now, while you are young, and suffer all you can, because these things don't last your whole life." One can be in love with several people at the same time, feel the sorrow with each, and not betray any of them. I would not have traded the delights of my suffering for anything in the world. He soon acquired the forlorn look that one sees in vegetarians. Disbelief is more resistant than faith because it is sustained by the senses. Nothing resembles a person as much as the way he dies. Armies in the field, advances at the speed of the slowest. The world was reduced to the surface of her skin and her inner self was saved from all bitterness. Just because someone does not love you as you want, it does not mean that you do not love with all his being. He pleaded so much that he lost his voice. His bones began to fill with words. I became aware that the invincible power that has moved the world is unrequited, not happy, love. Life is not what one lived, but what one remembers and how one remembers it in order to recount it. Both described at the same time how it was always March there and always Monday, and then they understood that José Arcadio Buendía was not as crazy as the family said, but that he was the only one who had enough lucidity to sense the truth of the fact that time also stumbled and had accidents and could therefore splinter and leave an eternalized fragment in the room. Morality, too, is a question of time. Florentino Ariza had kept his answer ready for 53 years, 7 months and 11 days and nights. Forever, he said. He repeated until his dying day that there was no one with more common sense, no stonecutter more obstinate, no manager more lucid or dangerous, than a poet. This was when she asked him whether it was true that love conquered all, as the song said. "It is true," he replied, "but you would do well not to believe it. Think of love as a state of grace, not the means to anything but the alpha and omega, an end in itself. I'll never fall in love again. It's having two souls at the same time. For you was I born, for you do I have life, for you will I die, for you am I now dying. You, for something that doesn't have any meaning for anyone. In the end, it is impossible not to become what others believe you are. No matter what you do this year or in the next 100, you will be dead forever. I don't believe in God, but I'm afraid of him." And taught him the only thing he had to learn about love, that nobody teaches life anything. To all, I would say how mistaken they are when they think that they stop falling in love when they grow old, without knowing that they grow old when they stop falling in love. It was a love of perpetual flight. No, not rich. I am a poor man with money, which is not the same thing. He always considered death an unavoidable professional hazard. I've remained a virgin for you. He did not dare to console her, knowing that it would have been consoling a tiger run through by its bear. If men gave birth, they'd be less inconsiderate. She had that rare virtue of never existing completely except for that opportune moment. Both looked back then on the wild revelry, and they lamented that it had cost them so much of their lives to find the paradise of shared solitude. Subscribe for more.